Hi everyone, this is the Algebra 1A Semester 1 exam review, and this is continuing with Chapter 3. So this is the second page under Chapter 3. We're going to cover problems 10, hopefully down through about number 20. Okay, so consider this line, 6x plus 4y equals 12. Find the x and the y intercepts. If you watched the previous video, we talked about this. Anytime you're looking for an x-intercept, we know that the y value is going to be 0. So in an equation like this, what's really going to happen is that y value is going to cancel out. It'll look like this. 6x plus 4 times 0 equals 12. This is gone, so I end up with just 6x equals 12, which means my x-intercept is at 2. Okay, and then we're going to do something similar for the y-intercept. So at the y-intercept, I know that x equals 0, so I would do 6 times 0 plus 4y equals 12, really letting this drop out. So 4y equals 12, which means y equals 3. Okay, so taking a look at number 11, we've got some multiple choice going on here. First off, we have a horizontal line. Okay, horizontal line equation is going to be y equals some number. Okay, anytime you see a horizontal line. So looking at our options, that would be option number 1. Okay, and then when I look at B and C, both of them are oblique, which means that they're both going to have both an x and a y in them. Okay, it's not an x equals or a y equals, it's x and y. The difference here is this has a positive slope, and this has a negative slope. Whoops. And I know that just from looking at the direction that the line points. If it points up to the right, it's positive. If it points down to the right, it's negative. So looking at my two equations here, this one has a positive slope. This one has a negative slope, so it actually just goes in order. So letter B goes with number 2, and letter C goes with number 3. Okay, number 12, this one is really, it looks like a lot of work, and it's really not. The thing I want you to focus on here is in letter A, it says A equals 0. B and C are not 0, but A is. What you really want to be looking at is where do you have a 0? If A is 0, that means I technically don't have this term in the equation, which means I only have a y. So this is like, if I simplify it, it's going to come out to be y equals a number. Y equals a number is going to give me a horizontal line, so that'd be number 1. Okay. In letter B, I have B equals 0, which means I don't have this term at all. And that means that if I simplify this equation, I end up with x equals some number. That's going to give me a vertical line, so that'd be number 3 down here. And that should mean this is number 2, but notice that here none of them are equal to 0. So this is where you're going to have an x and a y in the equation. And anytime you have both x and y, you get an oblique or a diagonal line. So that would be option number 2. Okay, let's carry on. I'm back here. Okay, write this equation in standard form. This was something we didn't spend a ton of time talking about, but you should know everything that you need to know to do this. Standard form looks like this. So we want to get this in this form. And I will tell you, there's no like magic way of looking at this and pulling numbers out and plugging it into this. It's not a formula thing. It's just a moving this around until it looks like this kind of thing. So first thing I'm going to do is move this x term to the other side. And I'm going to do that by subtracting 5/3 x and subtracting 5/3 x. So that's going to leave me with negative 5/3 x plus y equals 12. Now technically we're in the right form, but one other thing you should know about standard form is that you're not allowed to have fractions in it. So the way that we can clear out this fraction is I'm going to take the entire equation and multiply by the denominator of the fraction. I'm going to multiply by 3. So right here what's going to happen if I multiply by 3 This 3 and this 3 are going to cancel, and I'll be left with just a negative 5. But then I do need to multiply that 3 by the y and by the 12 as well. So that gives me a 3y and a 36. And now this is in what we would call standard form. When equations are in standard form, we have a trick for finding the slope. And I'm going to remind you of the trick, and then I'm going to show you how that works if we compare these two equations here. So looking at number 14, I've got a standard form equation, and it asks me for the slope. And you could rearrange this so that it's in slope-intercept form, and then the slope is just this magic number sitting here in front of the x. But we have a shortcut, and our shortcut is you can always find it by doing negative a over b. If you think about what standard form looks like, you can always find slope by doing negative a over b. Let me just go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you how that relates up here. So in this equation, it would be negative 2, that's negative a, over negative 6. Negatives cancel, and 2 over 6 reduces, and so we get a slope of 1/3. Okay? And again, if that's confusing to you, take a look at this. We know what this equation looks like in slope-intercept form. Okay, like if we put this back in slope-intercept form, if we solved for y, it would come out looking like this. And look at your slope there, 5/3, right? If we did negative a, that would give us a positive 5/3. And the reason for that is when you move things to the other side, when you move that x term to the other side, it switches signs. Okay, so this would change to a negative 2x, and then I would be dividing by a negative 6. So that's where this comes from, and then it reduces to 1/3. You don't necessarily have to know why that works the way it does, but you should know this. And if you didn't know this, you could always move this around to slope-intercept form, but just trying to save you some time. Okay, on to number 15. So all of these questions are asking you to write the equation for a line. Okay, and if you're writing in slope-intercept form, that means you need two things. You need a slope and you need a y-intercept for every single problem. Okay, and we're going to kind of talk about how we can tackle both of those things. So in this first equation, or in this first problem, finding the slope isn't too bad. Remember that when you have coordinates, you can do slope by doing y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Which means in this problem, it would be 6 minus 4 over negative 1 minus 2, which is 2 over negative 3, otherwise known as negative 2/3. Okay, now we need a y-intercept, and we don't have a y-intercept given to us here. So what I always do is I start with the form that I know I'm looking for. Whoops, jumping ahead of myself here. I know I'm trying to get it into this form. Okay, so I'm going to plug this in for m, and I'm going to plug one of these coordinates in for x and for y over here. Okay, so it's going to look like this. 4 equals negative 2/3 times 2 plus b. Once again, I wish we had given you nicer numbers to work with here, but take what we can get. That's going to be negative 4/3 plus b. Add negative 4/3, or I'm sorry, add 4/3 to each side. And I believe you're going to get 16/3 as a b value. If you're doing that in decimal form, it would be like 5.3 repeating. Okay. But then you need to take these two things and put them back together. You have your m, you have your b, and write an actual equation now. And I'm kind of short on space here, but so for number 15, the final answer would look like this. Y equals negative 2/3 x plus 16/3. Okay. Or again, fractions, or I'm sorry, decimals for those would be fine too. Okay. Okay, so 16. The line is parallel to 9x minus 6y equals 12. So the first thing I need is a slope, and this is where I'm going to get my slope from, because I know that if lines are parallel, the slopes are same. The slopes are the same. And this is in standard form, so that allows me to use that fancy negative a over b trick, which would be negative 9 over negative 6, which reduces to positive 3/2. Okay, so I have my slope of 3/2. Now what I'm going to do is the same thing I did right here. So I'm going to say y equals mx plus b. And I'm going to fill in x, y, and m. Okay, so 2 equals 3/2 times 4 plus b, that's going to be a 6. And then I'm going to subtract that 6, and I get b equals negative 4. And so for my equation, now I'm going to go back and use my m and my b that I found and say y equals 3/2 x minus 4. Okay. Number 17 is actually easier than the past two, because 17 just goes ahead and hands you your slope, so that's your m value. And so I'm just going to start at this point, or this point. I'm going to start at the point where I'm using y equals mx plus b. Hope we make it here. So I would say 3 equals negative 3 times 2 plus b. Again, I plugged in m, x, and y. So I get 3 equals negative 6 plus b. Add that 6 to the other side, and I get 9 for a b value. And so I would write the equation, y equals negative 3x plus 9. Okay, 18 is very similar to 15. I'm going to start by finding my slope. So I'm going to do 6 minus negative 4 over 2 minus negative 1, which gives me 10 over 3. Because this is a slope, I'm probably going to stick with it in fraction form. So now I'm going to say y equals mx plus b. I'm going to plug this in for x and y. So I would say 6 equals 10 over 3, oh, another ugly one, times 2 plus b. That gives me 6 equals 20 over 3 plus b. I would subtract 20 over 3 on each side, and I believe that gives me negative 2 over 3. You could check that in a calculator, but so I get negative 2/3 for b. Put these two things together for an equation, and I get y equals 10/3 x minus 2/3. Okay. Okay. 19 is similar to 16, not exactly the same, but similar. We know the line is parallel to this, which means this is where I'm going to get my m value. Now, unlike number 16, I don't have to use that negative a over b thing because I'm in slope-intercept form. So I can just grab that number right there, and my slope is a 4. Here's my x and y. Okay. So y equals mx plus b, kind of a broken record here, means 2 equals 4 times 1 plus b. So that's a 4, subtract it from the other side, and I get negative 2 as a b value. And so my equation would be y equals 4x, here's my m, minus 2. And one last one, hopefully I can get it in before my battery dies here. Perpendicular to this line. So this is a little bit different. the slope right now in this equation is negative 2/3. But because it's perpendicular, I need to take that negative 2/3 and do the opposite reciprocal. So I'm switching the sign and flipping the fraction over. So my slope is going to be a 3/2. Okay? Here's my x and y. Y equals mx plus b means 1 equals, gosh, we really were not nice to you with these numbers. Negative 2/3 times 7 plus b. That means 1 equals negative 14/3 plus b. I would add a positive 14/3 on each side. This is really 3/3 if you want to think about it in terms of 3 as a denominator. So 3 plus 14, that gives me 17/3. And so then I'm going to put m and b together. Where'd my m go? 3/2, 17/3. So I would have y equals 3/2 x plus 17/3. Okay. I know I went kind of quickly through those last few, but those are all ones that were pretty similar to each other, and I was following kind of the same process every time. Feel free to pause it just to look at this page if you need to for anything else. And then I'll continue with the rest of Chapter 3 in subsequent videos.